a difficult question, in my opinion, which is what's going on with Donald Trump.
With who?
With Donald Trump.
Who cares?
And who's this guy? You don't know.
This.
Yeah, Mark, what has happened so far is that he has decided after attacking Iran that the after attack, the ceasefire, MOU, tit for tat, and he's now talking about an economic war against Iran to crush their economy, collapse the economy,
Again.
and put it into
Again.
to change the regime. This is the final goal right now through the economic, sort of attack on Iran. What is looking at the situation between the two sides, in your opinion, are we getting somehow to the moment of the economic war and it's going to be the rest of his administration, the rest of his time as the president of the United States, or maybe after the midterm elections, he's going to get back again attacking Iran to see if he can change the atmosphere, the whole consequences of the war so far, which are not in favor of the United States by any means, by any measures. And he wants to change that. And it's going to be a combination of both economic and hot war, or he's going to continue the same way that he did in his first administration. If you remember, in 2018, he did the same, withdrawing from JCPOA and tremendous sanctions on the Iranian economy to collapse the government. Your understanding of that?
Yeah, so basically what we see is the Trump administration continues to flail around, moving from one thing to none, from one unhinged rant of Trump's to another, one. I hesitate to use the word stratagem, but yeah, from one play to another, when they've got no good options left, and they realize that if the U.S. Could do anything militarily that would change the situation, they would, right? But ultimately, it seems that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff has finally pounded it into Trump's head that dropping a few more bombs on Iran will not change the regime, right? And will not stop Iran's ability to reach out and exert control over the Strait of Hormuz, because they have too many options to do that with, right? Whether we're talking drones, aerial drones, UAVs, surface drones, USVs, underwater drones, which were used in the last week for the first time, sea mines, anti-ship cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, aircraft, even artillery, right? All of that, fast attack boats, all of that could be brought to bear at any given time. And it doesn't take much to damage a tanker moving through, as they've proven multiple times. And there's nothing that they can move through that strait that Iran ultimately isn't aware of. They don't have to hit every single thing that goes through, because their goal here is to leverage the economic pressure of the pain on the global energy markets, on the global economy, and to weaponize that against the United States. If a ship or through gets through, or if they let an occasional, Chinese ship or Iraqi ship through, that doesn't ultimately change things, because the pressure is still building. It's still causing a massive reduction in the amount of oil and LNG and other things that the global market, needs. So not being able to change those things militarily, he's resorted once again to this geoeconomic game of chicken, right? We're back to this again. We've already been here, because after the first 40-day hot phase failed to achieve the U.S.'s results, they agreed to a ceasefire, if you remember, and then for 2 months there was these dueling blockades, right? This geoeconomic game of chicken, where it was a game to see who blinked first. And there were occasional naval skirmishes in and around the Strait of Hormuz during that time period, mostly aerial. The U.S. would try to hit a few fast attack boats, or some of the Iranian air defense, on the Strait of Hormuz. But these were relatively light engagements, temporary things, and for 2 months, and the U.S. failed to achieve their goal. Now we're back to that again, and somehow they've convinced themselves, or they simply have no other good options, and they talk a good game. That this time, however, the sanctions will lead not only to Iran, weakening its demands, which have only gotten stronger, right? But the first time around, it was the U.S. who blinked first in the geoeconomic game of chicken, and that led to the third phase, which was the U.S. agreeing to and signing the memorandum of misunderstanding with their fingers crossed behind their back, right? So it was the U.S. who blinked first, and then that allowed an increased amount of ships, not a full traffic, but ships out of the Strait of Hormuz, and a rather large number of Iranian tankers to depart for around the world. But at that point, it served the U.S.'s purposes, even Iranian oil, because they simply needed oil on the global markets, right? So they're still playing the game of trying to manipulate the markets. Now, the U.S. promises there's going to be devastating sanctions. There's not much left they can sanction against Iran, right? Like the situation with Russia, they're left threatening the rest of the world to try to force them to stop trading with Iran, similar, to the same situation with Russia. And we've, of course, already heard from Russia and China that, piss off. we're not going to obey your sanctions. This is all ultimately your fault. And sanctions are, we don't agree with them. They're not the answer against us, and we're certainly not going to agree to follow them when used. And it's likely that India will hem and haw and then look for ways to loopholes to get around the sanctions, because ultimately that's what they did with Russia, as well. And Iranian oil will continue, to a lesser degree than they would like, to reach the markets and be sold, even if it's for a cheaper price. But again, as oil prices go up, and the U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, immediately after announcing these new devastating sanctions, which, by the way, have not actually been applied to any country a week later yet, right? Because they're still worried, of course. The whole purpose of a lot of this is, market manipulation, right? That's what these announcements, these statements are for. And Trump has, let's be fair, used his social media rants rather skillfully to manipulate oil markets. He seems to, that, or the oil markets are, well, they're just stupid. They're human beings. That's it's human beings reacting to these things stupidly. But what do you expect from capitalists? Anyway, so Bessent expressed surprise. He just didn't understand the oil markets, because after they announced these devastating new sanctions, secondary sanctions, the oil market went up again. And he's like, it's not supposed to do that. It's supposed to go down, right? And so they were all clearly upset about that development. But the U.S. midterms aren't the end-all, be-all of the situation, but they certainly factor into the Trump administration's thinking here. But more than that, factors in the fact that they're simply out of munitions. The U.S. military power has reached the geopolitical hard limit. They don't have enough standoff munitions to continue sustained attacks on Iran, for any length of period. They can talk up that they're going to destroy all of Iran's power plants and whatever they want, infrastructure. But the end of the day is they don't have enough standoff munitions to do it. They're scraping the bottom of the barrel of tomahawks, of JASSMs, and we found out in the last week as well, they've exhausted their supplies of short-range ballistic missiles as well, of ATACMs and precision strike missiles. So they simply don't have it. And while they do have plenty of, say, JDAM glide bombs, Iran still has a functioning air defense that the U.S. Air Force is afraid of and refuses to fly substantially into Iranian airspace because they get hit down. And we know they get hit down because of the 45 MQ-9 Reapers that the U.S. has lost. Those they were willing to send into Iranian airspace, the most recent last week. And every time they do, or I don't know if every time, but substantially enough times, they get brought down. And that's why the U.S. won't risk their, much more expensive fixed wings aircraft, trying to fly into Iranian airspace. And without that, they have to rely on standoff munitions fired from Iraqi airspace or from the Gulf of Oman. And they just don't have enough munitions for it. And we know that they don't have enough air defense interceptors, right? Not PAC-3s for the Patriots, not SM-3s and SM-6 for the naval units, not THAADs, for longer range ballistic defense. They're running out of all of these things, and they can't defend their allies. They can't defend the Gulf states that they're launching these attacks from. They can't defend their military bases. They can't defend the energy infrastructure that powers the economy of these countries, and they can't defend Israel. So there's just no good military options for them. They're discussing, at least according to Marjorie Taylor Greene, take that for what it's worth, but it seems plausible. They're discussing the use of tactical nuclear missiles, right, which they would try to use probably on some of Iran's missile underground fortress cities underneath the mountains. And from what I've seen of the what we know of the specs of those, there's no guarantee that a TAC nuke would actually stop those places from firing. And of course, that would make them, the U.S. being the only country, to again use nuclear weapons would be a very complicated diplomatic situation, to say the least, right, for them. So they're hesitant to do that. But so they got nothing else. They're going back to this geoeconomic game of chicken. I don't know why they think this will work better for them. The Iranian economy is not good, right? Let's have that moment of honesty. Inflation is high. It's not 300%, right? But it's upward of 60%, and there's still problems with that. Unemployment is growing. And Iran, there's all kinds of contradictory stories, on some versions during the first 4 months of the year, they made 25% more on oil sales than the year before. But then, of course, what has happened in the 4 months since then, we don't know. But we have to assume that, the U.S. has both done damage to Iran with its strikes, and that their economy, is suffering from the U.S. blockade, however effective it is or not. And, while they are opening and widening land corridors, through Pakistan, through Turkmenistan to China, and of course through the Caspian to Russia, that can't make up for everything, particularly when their main, cash export is oil. So their economy is not good. But U.S. economy is not good either. They just passed $40 trillion of debt this week. They're having problems with their bond markets and their debt payments. Their Navy is starting to suffer a lot of tear and wear. The Abraham Lincoln just finally limped home after its sailors are, trying to throw themselves off the ship and so forth. Their abilities to sustain this naval blockade for an extended period of time is very questionable. On top of that, the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve is still ticking out, right? At a tune of 6 million barrels a week. They're still trying to suppress oil prices, to suppress gasoline prices in the U.S., and they've only got another 2 months left on before they start doing serious. They reach critical levels and start doing serious structural damage to the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. So, there's they whether it's bluff or whether they actually believe it, I'm not sure that time is on their side, any more than it was during the first the phase of geoeconomic game of chicken. But there's a lot of signals coming out from Iran. First of all, it's clear this is not questionable. We've heard this previously from the new supreme leader, Mujtaba, the Ayatollah Mujtaba Khamenei, and we've heard it from others. There is a division on how to proceed forward within the Iranian political elite, right? We don't know exactly who's who, but we know that there are those who want to end the conflict diplomatically, and that seems to be the Iranian Foreign Ministry, Galibaf, the Speaker of the Parliament, at the least. And then we have the Supreme Leader himself, whose father and family were just killed by the U.S. in Israel, and probably him badly injured, and the IRGC that don't believe that any diplomatic outcome with the United States is possible. So there is that division. Also on the diplomatic side is clearly the Iranian president, Pezeshkian, Masoud Pezeshkian, who was elected on a improving relations with the West reform agenda. Somehow he's not been removed yet, and the U.S. certainly hasn't killed him. Some reason. Iran still, Trump still seems to not understand that Iran actually has a president. Like he's made comments this week that he says, "There's no one for me to talk to. No one wants to be the president." I mean, like this guy was the president, for years before your attack started. He's still alive. You haven't killed him yet, and he's still the president. Anyway. It's better not to talk about Trump. Just concentrate on what the U.S. is doing without obsessing over his latest unhinged, ignorant, puerile megalomaniac rant, because it's only going to cause you brain damage. It's trying to read logic and understanding into that. As an IRGC advisor to the Supreme Leader just pointed out this week, we just ignore what Trump says. He says it's childish, and there's no point in trying to
basically, Mark, sorry for interrupting you, but basically they're ignoring what Donald Trump is talking about. They said that it doesn't mean anything and nobody should care about what Donald Trump.
And it's I mean, as analysts, of course, we only have so much information. So yeah, I mean, we do pay attention, and there's a tendency to fixate on it. But I myself have to remind myself not to pay it too much credibility when what he's saying in his position and changes every week, if not every 15 minutes. But with this division in the Iranian government, what we're hearing even openly out of Iranian media, state and unofficial state, is that at least a large portion of the Iranian government, the quote unquote hardliners, want to go on the offensive. They don't want to wait, right? They don't want to wait to the midterms. They don't want to wait till Trump's office. They want to go back to war now because they think they have more leverage against the United States through that, and it must be said against the Gulf state, vassals of the U.S. In the military situation. That it is a good military situation via the United States for them now. That they can do more damage and gain more leverage that way. And evidently they want to attack Gulf state infrastructure. They're talking about resuming strikes on Israel. And they're talking about cutting the fiber optic cables beneath the Strait of Hormuz, the global internet cables. And they're even talking about launching ballistic missiles at Europe, which is well within the range of their long-range ballistic missiles. They're talking about at least U.S. military bases in Bulgaria, in Sofia, and in Cyprus, British military air bases in Cyprus. So they're definitely talking about those things. And believe me, the U.S. would love to resort to the hammer if they hadn't even started to worry themselves that they're out of hammers, right? Or that the hammer's not looking too good. But it hasn't been effective for them. And again, they're running out of munitions. I think it's fairly likely, at least, that it is actually the Iranians who will take preemptive action, as they see it, right? And return to conflict with the U.S., return to, at the very least, kinetic strikes in the near future themselves. I think that is a strong possibility, at least from what we are hearing. It may not be immediate, right? They're talking. I've heard a time frame up to 4 to 5 weeks mentioned. So it may be a month from now, maybe again timed, for the midterm elections, the eve of the midterm elections in the United States. That's possible, or they may have other reasons, for that time frame window. But I think it is at this point at least as likely that we will see a return to more active military operations, and that it's at least as likely that it will be the Iranians who will initiate this next round more than the Americans. But obviously, nothing is settled. I mean, there's no negotiations at all. It seems there's very little even exchange of text messages by third parties going on, right? That it has even obviously diminished. I mean, the Iranians have said now that we've heard from at least some Iranian officials and state media that they don't want to talk to Trump, that they see no point in it, and that they're perfectly willing to wait out the rest of his term. Well, I think a lot of things will arise before that, right? Like the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, but that's where we are, right? We're back in a geoeconomic game of chicken, and that will last until someone sees it as more advantageous for them to return to kinetic operations. And that is as likely at this point as not to be Iran who initiates that as the United States.